Hey everyone, Sam here, otherwise known as FPL Pricey. In today's video, I'll be running through all of the key updates to help you lock in your sides ahead of Game Week 12, including my team selection ahead of the deadline. Let's not waste any time, let's get straight on into it. Right then, so let's get started by having a look at my Game Week 11 performance very quickly, just as a reminder. But before we do, a big shout out again to Antonio Montana for the second time in 2 videos now, and as well as Board Game Mate, who both correctly guessed which shirt I was wearing in the last video. That was Vitoria SC from the 2015-16 season. Quite niche. This one might be a bit easier, but if you can guess what shirt I'm wearing, what season it was from, and whether it was home or away, if you get it right, you get a shout out at the start of the next video. So good luck with that. In the meantime though, 54 points from Game Week 11. Not exactly a terrible game week, a bit of a grey arrow. I didn't really go far up or down. I think I lost about 30k in rank, so not a nightmare, but it was the individual performances that were maybe the most concerning. Now, at the very least, I got my captaincy right. I got Salah, 14 points, goal and assist, and that second return it just felt so inevitable with Salah, and it always does at the moment, and that is something that I don't want to forget too quickly. He is just so inevitable, and it gets to the 80th minute and I still didn't really have that many doubts that he was going to get another chance. And although he's not getting as many chances as in the past, he does feel all the more clinical and far more effective than he has been in the past at burying those one-on-ones. So Salah for me is absolute gold dust right now, and he saved me from what would have been a pretty big red arrow otherwise, because looking around my side, disappointing performances pretty much everywhere else. Haaland getting a goal and then the yellow card taking him out of the bonus was very disheartening, although I didn't captain him, so maybe not a bad thing. Dominic Calvert-Lewin yet again stinking up my team. He's got to go. He's such a massive issue in my side right now. Even with a good fixture this week, I think it's probably time to just get rid. And triple Spurs as well against Ipswich. Really disappointing. Only came away with 1 assist from that triple up, and that was Porro. Probably the least likely of the 3 to get a return in that game. And Arsenal yet again double clean sheet wipeout. So across the board, a pretty disappointing game week, but I came out of it with pretty much equilibrium. 54 points was enough for around about a grey arrow and not too much damage done, but lots and lots of manoeuvres that I'll need to make and issues in my side that I need to correct very soon. Let me know in the comments below how you got on in Game Week 11. It feels like a lifetime ago now, but if you can remember, put it in the comments below, and if you beat me, especially congratulations. So as is tradition on these videos, I take a look at some of the key potential issues facing all of us, not just me, ahead of Game Week 12. And there are a lot of flags facing us in all of our teams right now. I think if you've gotten away without any flags, you're doing very, very well and very lucky at the moment ahead of Game Week 12. But the good news is that we're in an international break at the moment, and quite often we see a lot of sort of international break injuries, we like to call them, where they're not proper injuries. It's just being cautious with the player. And I think this international break in particular has been one of the most poignant and the most standout in terms of recent history anyway, in the sense of these players are maybe just taking precautions ahead of what will be a really busy calendar for their domestic clubs ahead of the Christmas festive period. And I think a lot of these players, their flags will be removed in the coming days when we get to the press conferences, when we see training photos. I think a lot of it will become clear that they were just taking precautions. Now, Cole Palmer is top of the list, and I'm almost certain that he is one of those precautionary withdrawals from international duty. He didn't play for England over the break. He's obviously rested up, and whatever small issue he was dealing with seems to be a thing of the past already. He's already been pictured in training photos during the week, so I'd be extremely surprised if he was an issue coming into Game Week 12. And the same probably goes for the majority of these. Now, Bukayo Saka, I might just put a little bit more caution on. The reason for that is because he did actually come off in Game Week 11. He was hobbling off, and he did wave to the bench with 10 minutes to go when they weren't winning the match either, that he needed to come off. So he might be a bit more of an issue, but I still expect that Arteta will normally play Saka if at all possible. He's one of their most important players, if not the most important player. And we've seen time after time with Saka that if he's anywhere near fit, he will play. And I say this, I could probably clip it right now and record it for future videos. He usually comes off hobbling at the end of a match, and he's usually fine for the next game week. There are exceptions, but I think that at the moment, I wouldn't be too worried about Saka. Do, of course, look out for training ground photos, but it's very unlikely that Arteta and Arsenal are going to give too much away. I think it's just one of those that you just hope that he's okay for game week 12, and I think I put it around 95% he will be. Moving down, Brian Mbeumo and Yohan Wissa, I think are both international break injuries as well. But again, just make sure that you listen out for the Brentford press conference, you listen out for Thomas Frank and also those training ground photos as well. I'm recording this Tuesday night, which is quite early. It's because of my own schedule, so my bad on that. But I will be putting out any updates on my Blue Sky and on my Twitter profile ahead of the deadline if we hear any more on any of those players. The one that is probably a bit more of a problem is Alexander-Arnold. Now, we don't know for sure anything just yet, but considering he came off very early in game week 11 and it looked like a hamstring thing, I would be surprised if he was okay to play in game week 12. I think if it was a really big match, then they might rush him back and hopefully he would be fit for it. But because it's Southampton, because you'd expect that Connor Bradley can play there, deputise there, and probably be absolutely fine, and the result shouldn't be in too much of a question, I'd be surprised if they rush Trent back, especially given that their upcoming fixtures after Southampton include Madrid, include Man City. You probably want to save him for those matches. So I think he's more of a problem, and considering the good fixture that you'd want him for is the one that I'd expect him to be rested for, I think he is probably a sell. Now, I'll come on to some of the best defensive replacements later on in the video because I'm looking up some defensive replacements of my own. But I think for the time being, considering the money and the fact that the fixtures that I expect him to play in the next few are not the best, it might be an opportunity to just rejig your 11 a little bit, take money out of defense and use it elsewhere. It's not that he's a bad pick necessarily, it's just that I think money can be used better in other places, especially given the opportunity being that he is a big doubt ahead of game week 12. So a lot of strikers are on the key transfer targets ahead of game week 12, and actually a few that probably don't even make it onto this list. But the three I've picked out are Isak, Pedro and Jackson. Now, I want to just talk about Jackson maybe opportunistically now because I won't get a chance to later on because he's not actually in my transfer plans for this week. Now, that might be a little bit ignorant of me. And the reason that I wanted to include him now is to leave it up for discussion. So if you disagree with me, feel free to let me know in the comments below because he is, in his own right, a very good striker and a good pick on relatively decent money as well. So I do like him. The data's good, but the thing that is putting me off of him at the moment is, well, twofold. One, it's Palmer being the more important talismanic pick in their team. And whenever Jackson does well, Palmer will probably also do pretty well as well. And that means that there's limited bonus on offer too. So that maybe dents his appeal slightly. He's also not on penalties because of Palmer. And then the final kind of nail in the coffin, as it were, is the fact that he is on 4 yellows, and I do already have Semenyo in my team. Now, if you're out there and you don't have Semenyo or Ait-Nouri, for instance, and you're looking at a striker, then maybe Jackson could be accommodated more easily because you won't have to worry about 2 or 3 players in your 11 being on 4 yellows and therefore 1 game away from a suspension. As it is, in my team, I can't really go there safely because I'm looking at Ait-Nouri and I've already got Semenyo, and having 3 of them just seems like tempting fate a little bit too much for me, and especially because there are other strikers putting up relatively similar numbers who are on penalties, who are getting 90 minutes. I think I can maybe just put him to one side for now, and look, he's probably going to score pretty well over the next stretch of fixtures. Great fixtures to come, by the way, as well, but he's one that maybe I just can't quite get to myself. Now, looking at the other 2 strikers, Isak and Pedro. Pedro I'll talk about a lot more later on. I will with Isak as well, by the way. But both of them are very talismanic for their teams. They're very important to their team setup. Pedro doesn't necessarily always play number 9. He sometimes plays a more withdrawn 10 role just off of the striker. But the XG per 90 is still really strong. We think he's still on penalties. And the same goes for Isak as well. So both of these picks, very good. I think with Pedro, the real kicker is the fact that he's 5.4 million, which is insanely good value for someone who's playing in a really attacking lineup and puts up good data himself as well. And both of which have very good fixtures. So both very good buys this week. I wouldn't have any hesitation in recommending either. Bruno Fernandes and Semenyo. Now, Semenyo is a cut price option, 5.7 million at the moment, I believe, but great fixtures over the next stretch. He's not quite talismanic in that Bournemouth side, but he is putting up good data and his shot volume is incredibly high. So I still recommend him as the mid to low price midfielder of choice at the moment. Bruno Fernandes, oh, that, by the way, that is with Semenyo on 4 yellows. As I mentioned earlier, do look out for that if you've already got 1 or 2 other options that are on 4 yellows in your starting 11 at the moment. So that is a little asterisk against him. Bruno Fernandes, though, again, I think I can quite easily rate him very highly without necessarily going there myself this week. And the reason I won't be going there is because it just doesn't suit my structure. The second reason is because whilst the next 2 fixtures are really good, after that, they go into a little patch of quite poor fixtures. And I almost want to use this next stretch of 6 or 7 weeks as an opportunity to have a look at the way Amorim wants to set up. Where Bruno's going to fit into that system will be really important as to whether or not he's going to be an incredible FPL asset at that price or just a good one. My suspicion is he's going to turn into an incredible one very quickly, and he's going to play in that 10 role in behind the striker and have very limited defensive duties to have to pick up in the new system. If that's the case, at 8.4, he could be absolute gold dust. 90-minute man on penalties again, on set pieces. He has incredibly good upside. So I don't want to put anyone off of going for him now. But personally for me, it doesn't quite suit my setup. So going for him right now maybe is something I'll put a pin on and I'll look at it again in a few game weeks time. But again, really recommend him right now. Even with only 2 good game weeks to come, I still expect him to be a decent option even with poorer fixtures. I just can't quite fit him into my setup in particular myself. So now on to the captaincy matrix ahead of game week 12, and it's a really good one this week. 4 great options, arguably even more than that as well. You could have Saka in here too, at home to Nottingham Forest, but I've picked 4 just for brevity's sake. Now, differential-wise, I do really like Isak against West Ham at home, who are all at sea at the moment. The defensive data is not looking good, and Newcastle going forward look better and better every week at the moment. Isak as well, his data is increasing week on week. 3 goals in 3 games, 4 returns in the last 3 Premier League games as well. Really like him as an option and really do quite like him as a differential captaincy alternative this week. I think the only thing that would put me off of him in particular is the fact that the other 3 are just so strong this week, all 3 of which are very high on the expected points from Fantasy Football Hub. Palmer is lower, but only because he's got the yellow flag at the moment. If that was removed, his expected minutes would go up and he'd be very close to parallel with Salah and Haaland. Leicester away from home for Palmer is a very good fixture. Don't let the fact that it's away from home fool you. Palmer is an incredibly good flat track bully when it comes to FPL points. We've seen it last season. We've started seeing it already this season against the likes of Brighton and Wolves. Defensively, not such great teams. Brighton maybe less so, and maybe were caught off guard by the fact that they didn't have Dunk, so it made them weaker that game week. But the point still stands. And against these sort of teams, Palmer does more often than not haul, especially against the promoted sides. So Leicester, all at sea at the moment themselves, I do think Palmer has a very good chance of going big in this match. And I do expect that yellow flag to be removed, as I mentioned. Salah as well, great captaincy option. I think this will be the probably most popular captaincy option this week because so many managers have already gotten rid of Haaland or are looking at doing so this week. Salah against that Southampton backline looks like a fantastic option. I think I saw FPL Meerkat mention that right wingers have already scored 7 goals in 11 game weeks against Southampton. So it's a great matchup from that point of view. And Salah's not your average right winger either. Southampton will play out from the back. We always say it, and they will get caught high up the pitch. or I guess in their defensive third, so high up for Liverpool. And importantly, Salah has been fully rested during the international break, so 90 minutes shouldn't really be a problem for him, even with big fixtures to come against Real Madrid and Man City. I'd be surprised if he didn't get very good minutes. On top of that, Ramsdale has got a broken finger. So it looks like McCarthy is going to be the stand-in in goal. And I'm a Southampton fan. Any Southampton fan would probably tell you that Ramsdale has saved us on a number of occasions already this season. And I think that Salah up against McCarthy, who hasn't played in a little bit, seems like just a dream matchup right now. So I do really like this matchup. Salah is an incredible option as a captaincy. And maybe, if you're feeling really risky, you could look at triple captaincy this week. Although the fact that it's away from home might just put me off that little bit. And you could look at the home tie later on in the season if you still wanted this matchup in particular. Now, this brings me on to Erling Haaland, who a lot of managers have sold. I'm looking at selling this game week, but I do still genuinely believe he's one of, if not the best captaincy option this week. Fantasy Football Hub agrees, expected points of 8.5 is the highest. 12 goals is obviously by far the most goals so far this season. And 1.05 XGI per 90 is again leaps and bounds ahead of any of these other captaincy alternatives and ahead of anyone else in the game who's played reasonable minutes so far. The matchup itself, yellow on the ticker, but ignore that. The matchup is great. Spurs at home, Man City at home, we know, have great haul potential. Erling Haaland is much more of a flat track bully in home matches, can go big in those home matches much more often. In fact, I think only one of his hat-tricks, don't quote me on that, but very few of his big hauls have come away from home. Almost all of them have been exclusively at home. Spurs have also got a very makeshift back line at the moment. It looks like Romero's a doubt, Van der Ven's definitely a big doubt, and it could be a back line of Dragusin and Ben Davies. If that's the case, and they stick to their ethos of playing that high line, we saw it famously last season against Chelsea. They don't like going against that ethos. Haaland could very easily exploit that, especially if Foden's playing in behind him or if De Bruyne is back, which we think could be the case this game week. Those players feeding him against a high line, you can just picture it now, him bearing down on goal 3 or 4 times, 3 or 4 big chances. And it's only a matter of time now before he starts overperforming in any given game week again. Now, the fact that he's been underperforming recently on the expected data doesn't put me off him as a pick. The thing that I'll come on to the reasons why I might look at selling him regardless of this in a minute, but him as a captaincy choice this week still stands up on his own 2 feet very, very nicely and arguably is even better than the likes of Salah, Palmer, or Isak, but it's whether or not that the combinations benefit you elsewhere with spreading that money. And I think that's where I'll come into my transfer options in just a second. But don't let anything I'm about to tell you in future sections put you off of captaining him. This week in isolation could be a fantastic matchup and relatively differential considering a lot of managers are either selling him or have sold him. So am I insane for getting rid of him this week? Maybe, but at least hear me out in the next section as to why I'm considering it. So having said all of that on Erling Haaland, all of those pros, I am still looking at potentially getting rid of him. And my first instincts on transfers, 2 free transfers, 0.1 in the bank, is to get rid of Erling Haaland and use that money to upgrade a midfielder spot to Cole Palmer. Now, obviously, the yellow flag on Cole Palmer does give me the opportunity to maybe just hold on to Erling Haaland, but I think it's very unlikely that Palmer won't play. And Palmer's fixtures over the next, arguably even all the way through to, I think it's like game week 27, 28, on the whole, look incredibly positive, especially over this medium-term period. Not having Cole Palmer is hurting me a lot and will continue to hurt me against some of these weaker sides. So I really need to sort that out. The only way I can possibly get to him, given my team value and the structure I'm currently in, is to get rid of Erling Haaland. Now, this week in isolation is a good week for Erling Haaland, but he's got some tough fixtures to come. He's got Liverpool the following week, and then arguably even after that, all the way through to, I believe it's game week 18, he's got fixtures that maybe not bad for someone like Erling Haaland, but not captainable against some of the other options, the premium options, like your Palmers, like your Salahs, like your Sakas. I think every single week you could put up a strong case to captain someone else other than Erling Haaland. So then the point kind of stands that if you're not captaining someone who's 15 million or more, you're only really getting out of it the exact FPL points he's actually producing. And if he puts up 1 goal a game on average, which is about what he's going at the moment, and I think most people would expect him over a season, considering the underlying data of just over 1 per game, is he'll get to about 38 goals over a season on average if he played every single week. Now, he won't play every single week. I'm sure he'll be injured at some point this season, but he'll go at about a goal a game. So if you were to spread that out over an average, over the next few game weeks, it's whether or not I think that I can take that on with someone who is far, far cheaper with probably better fixtures. Now, Alexander Isak is that man for me. And the next 2 game weeks in particular, West Ham at home and Crystal Palace away look fantastic. He does have Liverpool in there in 3 weeks' time. But then after that, the fixtures look great again. And I think even if Isak runs him fairly close, the value I can get out of having that extra money elsewhere in my midfield, for instance, I think as a combination works out much, much better, especially if I'm not captaining or planning to captain Erling Haaland. So this is why the decision is kind of on the table for me right now. It's maybe not the ideal week to do it from an Erling Haaland point of view, but getting rid of Johnson this week, who would be my make weight for Palmer, does make a lot more sense. Away at Man City, although you can see Johnson getting goals in any game, the data's good. I think Johnson versus Palmer this week and over the long run it's undeniable which one comes out on top. You've got Palmer on penalties, 90-minute man, much more clinical, better data, and I expect it to improve as well with better fixtures. I think that's an easy choice over which one I prefer. And I think that Haaland versus Isak over the next stretch is fairly close. I think Haaland does pip him, but it is close. And then it's what you can do with that extra, I think, 3 or so million that I've got from this move as well. And that 3 million goes a long way in the next few weeks. It might even get me up to Saka and a triple midfield premium as well. So this would be for free. I've got 2 free transfers. I can do this. Obviously, plenty in the bank. I save a lot of money by doing this. And if I do decide that I'm not going to captain Erling Haaland this week, I think this pays off. Not necessarily this week, although I think it does. But over the long term, over the next 6 or 7 weeks, I think this does come out on top. And Palmer, even next week, might be my chosen captaincy choice. So let me know in the comments below what you think of this double swap. I'm not completely locked in on it, but reluctantly, I think I am pretty close to just saying this is the right maneuver for my team over the long run. But Haaland lovers, anyone who's on Haaland and remaining loyal to him, let me know in the comments below whether or not you think I'm going absolutely insane, or whether perhaps I've got a little bit of a point saying that someone like an Isak, perhaps a Jackson, perhaps a Watkins, perhaps even a Cunha, might not necessarily match him, but could run him fairly close over the next few if you're not captaining him. And it's what else you can do with that money that really makes a difference. And what I'm doing seems like a pretty good upgrade to me, but let me know what you think in the comments below. So you've heard what I'm likely to do with my free transfers, but that still leaves me with glaring issues in my side, none more so than Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who, despite having Brentford at home this week, I've just got to sell him. Surely I've just got to get rid of him. The alternative is to bench him this week and play Solanke away at Man City. I don't love that matchup because although Tottenham can definitely score against Man City, I think Solanke probably drops in a bit deeper and plays that pivot role, which he has done against some of the high-line defences that Spurs have played recently. And in those matches, he doesn't get high XG chances. He might get one against Man City. It's obviously not out of the realms of possibility, but I don't feel brilliant about starting him in this match in particular. I don't love the matchup. So therefore, I've got a choice whether or not to start Dominic Calvert-Lewin at home to Brentford or to take a hit, -4, to bring in the likes of either Cunha or João Pedro. Now, I have discussed other strikers, Jackson, Wissa as well, Raul Jimenez on previous videos this week. So do go back and have a look at some of those videos if you want a more detailed analysis as to why I'm kind of narrowing it down to just these two right now. But for for the sake of brevity, for the sake of time, because I don't want this video to take up an hour of your time, the two that I prefer right now are Cunha and Pedro. Cunha and Pedro, both fantastic on the bonus points, both on penalties, we think, both good underlying data. Pedro's is superior, but Cunha comes with a little bit more security given the fact that he hasn't really had the injury doubts that Pedro has had recently. Pedro, though, is obviously over $1 million cheaper, and I would say has slightly better fixtures in the short term. 2 of the next 4, for instance, are against promoted sides. So right now, it's whether or not I believe that taking a hit to get rid of DCL and bring in one of these two players is worth it. And right now, I'm coming down on the side of it is probably worth it. Not necessarily because I think that these players are guaranteed to score 4 more points than DCL or Solanke this week, but over the next few weeks, I've got a number of other transfers that, one way or another, I do want to get done. And if I just force in another transfer this week and remove another issue from my side now, it's one more issue I don't need to contest with every single week in the future. And the sooner I rip off that plaster, band-aid, whatever you want to call it, then the sooner I can get this out of the way and start focusing on more high upside moves elsewhere and maybe getting myself into a position of strength again. Whereas on the last few weeks, I've been a little bit more defensive and just sorting out one issue at a time, getting ahead of it again, especially ahead of the Christmas festive period where fixtures are coming thick and fast and those transfers are going to go quickly and injuries are going to mount up as well. I think bringing in one of these two players does make a lot of sense. The way I'm leaning right now, very, very marginally, is João Pedro. The reason for that is he's over $1 million cheaper, he's got slightly better data, and he's in the better attack as well. I also think the fixtures are very slightly better, and although Cunha is fantastic on the bonus points, if he gets 1 attack in return, he's probably getting bonus 2. I think João Pedro is also going to benefit from that, even though we haven't seen it so much so far this season. That's mainly because he's been injured, and the BPS is very favourable for a creative forward like himself. And he does rack up the chances, he does rack up the passes, and I think he'll get the same benefits that Cunha will have. And I really like the next 4 fixtures for João Pedro, slightly more than I do Wolves' next 4. The benefit of this as well, it opens me up with that extra money saved to get that triple midfield premium of Saka in the next couple of game weeks too. So I think very marginally, I'm preferring João Pedro, but it is very tight. The final thing to note as well is Fulham's defensive numbers are slightly better than Bournemouth's as well. So whichever one I want to play this week, I think Pedro slightly shades it because Bournemouth's numbers are a little bit weaker defensively too. But let me know in the comments below which one you prefer. You might already be on Cunha, in which case I think you're loving life. He's a great pick for the next few game weeks, but I think given the opportunity that Pedro presents at the price, I maybe very slightly favour him right here and now. Another move that I'm seriously weighing up if I want to go on the attack, if I want to get ahead of the game again, because I feel like I'm treading water at the moment. And if you feel a bit like me right now, I would never advise taking hits because hits are horrible in single game weeks. They don't pay off as much as you would like them to. But if you're bleeding points every week like I am, and you've got issues that just are mounting up quicker than you've got free transfers mounting up, so more than 1 issue per week, which I've definitely got right now in my side, taking 1 hit to just get back ahead of the crowd again is definitely a strategy that I think isn't necessarily given enough time of day sometimes. And maybe this is just a little bit of copium, but I'm definitely considering this, and I wouldn't necessarily want to rule it out of my mind just because there's this kind of fear of taking big hits in FPL. Now, if I was to add this on, it would be a -8, which seems very scary this game week, and I probably would be embracing a red arrow more likely than not this week. But over the next few game weeks, I do have a sneaky suspicion that all of these moves individually pay off for me. Now, the other move that I would be looking at is to rejig my defensive line a little bit. Now, Mykolenko is the one I've got on graphic here, but it could equally be for Rico Lewis too, who's been very disappointed. I don't expect him to start against Spurs, but the only reason that I've kept Lewis in my team in this imaginary scenario at the moment is because Man City's defensive numbers are much better than Everton's anyway. Lewis has been trusted more often than I thought he would be this season. So maybe Pep's got more faith in him than I currently do. And Walker is definitely running out of legs a little bit. So I think over the Christmas period, Lewis, especially with some of the early fixtures that Man City have got in a game week, you might get early team news on them. And if Rico Lewis starts, he's always going to be a decent option in a good defence with underlying data that's much better than Mykolenko's. So I'm hesitant to just get rid of Rico Lewis. I'm much happier to get rid of Mykolenko, who, despite the fact he got a clean sheet in game week 11, I don't love his prospects because, one, Everton are about to come into a really tough run of defensive fixtures. His underlying attacking data is also really poor this season, 0.05. And I just don't trust Everton defence anywhere near as much as someone like a Newcastle defence, as I would be bringing in Lewis Hall, for instance, or the attacking upside of Anait Nuri, who has much better attacking data than Mykolenko. So both of those alternatives I much prefer. For a hit this week doesn't necessarily sit very well, but especially in the case of Lewis Hall, West Ham at home is a really nice carrot that I think if any defender's got a reasonable chance of getting a 6-pointer or more, it is probably Lewis Hall at home to West Ham, followed by Crystal Palace away from home. And that means that I've strengthened my backline. I've still got Rico Lewis in it. So if I need to rely on Lewis in a few game weeks' time, once they've got Liverpool out of the way, I can do. And Lewis Hall has some great fixtures, barring that game week 14 fixture against Liverpool himself as well. So this wasn't necessarily my first instinct, but if I can make that hit pay off in the shorter term against either West Ham or Crystal Palace, and I think it probably does, then over the long term, I think that I've got myself a much more steady pick with higher upside and better defensive numbers than Mykolenko. Now, Ait Nuri is also in the mix. I think in terms of the projected the projected attacking returns for defenders over the remainder of the season, he actually comes out top with the spread betters, which is really interesting to note. But the defensive data is much, much worse than the likes of Newcastle, for instance. So it is very much a sort of a head versus heart decision. But right now, as it stands, I've got a gut feeling that just getting the -8 done out of the way this game week, it's got a low chance of paying off necessarily this week, but over a long term, I think it probably does. So let me know what you think of this. Other options do include the likes of Colwill, who again, good defensive numbers, but I don't necessarily trust them keeping clean sheets while Sanchez is in the side, and he himself has low attacking upside. And Lucas Digne as well has been requested as a mention. Now, I do like Digne. He made it into my wildcard draft earlier this week as well. The data is also pretty decent, but I do have this slight fear on Digne with the congested fixture period to come that because Villa do have good options at left back, Maatsen, for instance, can play there and was bought in as a big money signing. I do wonder if he loses his place every now and then just to rest him up. I think he's first choice, but I can see him getting rested at a moment where you really want to rely on him. Nevertheless, fixtures are really good, data's good, and I do like him at his price. So don't let me put you off of Lucas Digne in particular. Same goes for Konate. I think it's just the fact that they've got Man City, then Newcastle in 2 of the next 3 that maybe just leans me towards putting him off for a few weeks because I would really need to play this defender in the next 2 game weeks at least. That's the only reason I'm maybe not looking at Konate right now. At the moment, I think I very slightly favour Lewis Hall, but it's very close between the 2 of them. And again, right now, I think I'm slightly favouring taking the -8 and just throwing caution to the wind, ripping off that plaster, as it were, and maybe just taking the red arrow in my stride this week. Right then, so let's take a look at my bust team ahead of Game Week 12. I won't spend too long on this because we've talked about a lot of these individual players quite a lot already. But as I mentioned, 2 free transfers. I've already mentioned that I'm likely to take at least a -4, but quite possibly and quite plausibly a -8, which is extreme. But again, I've already detailed why I think that it is potentially best for my team in the long term, if not maybe necessarily the short term. I'm most likely to get rid of Haaland and Johnson, so Palmer and Isak coming in if Isak gets out of the Sweden game unscathed tonight. At time of recording, he's fine. If I do that, Salah undoubtedly gets the captaincy armband for me. Vice probably goes over to Palmer. But if for whatever reason that plan was kind of torpedoed over the coming hours because Isak gets injured or Palmer is a doubt, for instance, I could keep Haaland. And if I did, I think I'd probably put the armband on him, which again, maybe sounds ridiculous considering I'm probably going to sell him. But I've listed the reasons why long term I think it's for the greater good. Now, the other moves that I'm looking at making, of course, are to bench Rico Lewis and then to sell Mykolenko to start Lewis Hall, and then to also get rid of Dominic Calvert-Lewin, who's currently sat on my bench, but I'd be bringing in most likely João Pedro, possibly Cunha, but more likely João Pedro, and starting him ahead of Dominic Solanke, who I do believe is still a pretty good long-term hold. Overall, not too unhappy with my side if I make those moves, -8 aside, of course. And the 2 yellow flags in my starting 11, I do expect to disappear in the next couple of days. But of course, always play it cautious, listen out for press conferences, watch out for the early team news and any training photos as well. And overall, all I can say is massive good luck ahead of game week 12. Good luck to me as well, because I'm probably taking -8 hit, so it could end up pretty bad for me, but fingers crossed it all works out for the best long term. As always, if you've got any questions of your own ahead of the deadline, do feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I will try and get back to all of you before we lock in our teams. If you could leave a like and subscribe to the channel, it would be greatly appreciated. And as always, a massive good luck from me ahead of game week 12. I'll see you on the other side as we start preparing for game week 13.